Well, thank you, Catherine, for joining me this evening. I really appreciate your time today. I'm so excited because season two of Motherland the finale was just like epic, and it went in like three different directions at the same time. There's a lot to talk about, but a lot to love and a lot to kind of still process, even though it's a couple weeks later.
It's months later for us, and we're still processing. There was a lot that happened that episode.
Yes. So obviously, over the last couple of seasons, we've kind of gotten to see Petra's ambition on display a little bit. And we finally, of course, see her become general in the second season here. And there's a saying that says, heavy is the head that wears the crown. And we sort of see that in a lot of different aspects, at least in season two is more, between Alder, of course, General Alder, President Wade, and then at the end now with Petra. And I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of how that saying really comes to a multi-layered sense for Petra, as we see in the finale, when she and at least when she and Wade have this conversation, President Wade have this conversation that's kind of enlightens her. Obviously, we saw that before, like I said, with Alder too, and they have their discussions as well.
I think heavy is the head that wears the crown is apt, as is be careful what you wish for, because you just might get it. And I think they kind of converge in Petra at this point, because her ambition was to attain a certain level with a certain army, and that doesn't exist anymore. I mean, we have seen it really ravaged by the witch plague in the last couple episodes, and I think that the things she thought she was going to be in control of are all changed. I mean, she thought when she ascended to power, she would still have Sarah as a resource. She thought she would have the bellwether unit. She thought she'd have a healthy, intact a number of advisors and generals that she could rely on, and you know, the death count being high, the bellwether unit being on the run, and Alder not being available to her are all things that I don't think she would have factored in, one of, much less all of those, being a convergence for her reality now that the crown is hers, so to speak. So I think Petra has a lot of things to sort out for season 3.
Yes, and as we saw in the finale, she and Anacostia were going back to the belly of the beast, as they call Fort Salem. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of strategy now that Petra comes up with, because, like you said, you Petra might have relied on Alder, of course, for like strategies and things like that, but she doesn't have her as a resource, so she's going to be starting from scratch. She's going to be starting at Salem from scratch, and sort of that would be, that's there's good and bad aspects, of course, about those things as well. You get to forge your own path, and sort of the sense also, like as Abigail will be forging her own path, but you don't have things in place that you can rely on. You don't have people in place that you can rely on. You have to sort of fend for yourself and figure it out. So I know that Petra is a very smart and astute woman, so so confident.
On behalf of Petra, I thank you for that.
Very welcome. But you do also have this great resource, as I talked about as well, with Anacostia, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that relationship as well, because we saw bits and pieces of them together over season 2, not as much in season 1, but at season 2, they really became this great duo towards the end, and Anacostia was a great ally and someone who Petra can rely on. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that developing dynamic, because we saw Anacostia as a daughter figure for Alder. But what kind of figure are we seeing? Where does the respect, the honor, duty, and those things that end up being balanced within that relationship for Petra and Anacostia's relationship kind of come in?
I think for all of the challenges that are Petra, one of the things that I like about her is her consistent ability to appreciate good work. And so I think she has a very clear appreciation and respect for Anacostia. And I think she also knows that she's also savvy and astute and would know that there is no one closer to the knowledge that Alder held than Anacostia. So I think Petra will be wise enough to avail herself of that. And I think that probably played a great part in her elevating Anacostia's rank in season 2.
Well, I love that there's this great camaraderie that develops between Anacostia and Petra, and they really have an easy trust in one another as well. And that is something that I love about the relationship that we get to see between the two of them, because obviously, like we talk about Anacostia being more of like a daughter figure for Alder, and then Petra has her own daughter in Abigail. So it's nice to see that sort of sisterhood in a sense as well.
Yes.
Well, also in the finale, speaking of daughters, Petra leaves her daughter Abigail, kind of in the trust of the unit, of course, but along with Nicta and Scylla, of course, and all the people on the Jubilee bus. And then before that, there's the scene with Petra and Nicta where they talk about, they're going to fight the spree, fighting with the army against the Camarilla. And she also says that it's not really a reprieve for Nicta either. So I wanted to ask a little bit about, at the end where Petra leaves Abigail, where does Petra's trust then in the army and then their current circumstances lie in that regard to allowing Nicta to be on the run and also be a watchful eye of her daughter as well?
Well, I think events have unfolded that require Petra to deal with emergent circumstances, right? So, we practice our sports and rehearse our plays to get them where we think they should go. But when it's game time or show time, we deal with the emergent realities as they are, and hope that training gets us ready to deal in the moment with what lies ahead. So I don't know that that's an answered question. I do know that Petra is a soldier and a good soldier and will deal with what lies ahead using all of her skill. So while it may not have been textbook to release your daughter into the hands of, your decades-long sworn enemy, given what has befallen and given the existential threat to which is everywhere, you have to create a hierarchy of who you're going to have beef with.
Yes, and obviously Nicta proves, a good fighter in the duo between and Petra as well, fighting the Camarilla, and then Nicta is another clever character. So someone who's very good at hiding, and someone who's also very good at adapting. So that's like you said, if you're going to leave your daughter in the care of someone, of course her friends, people who have safety in that regard, but someone who also has these other set of skills that aren't necessarily part of army training as well, so sort of makes sense too.
Well, and it's twofold, right? Like initially she wasn't going to release her, but who better than the Bellwether unit to keep an eye on Nicta?
That's true.
I mean, like turnaround is a fair observation as well. And so, I think it is very easy to sort of look at like, okay, Nick to keep them safe, but we're still figuring out our feelings about Nicta.
Yeah.
I mean, and old hostilities are not easily forgotten. So while there may have been an emergent justification for Nicta's views on the world, that doesn't mean that they are comfortable in terms of that turning on a dime for the army, and in particular for Petra. So I think there may be, I do not know anything about season 3. Let me put that right out there so that this is not, ooh, that was a spoiler, a hint. No, it's not, but it's my sort of analysis is sort of coming to terms with Petra that makes me think that, there'd be a wisdom in the tactical nature of releasing Nicta to that Bellwether unit, as opposed to taking her back to a questionable status of Fort Salem, given the attack. So,
Well, we certainly got to see a lot of family dynamics through the bellwethers this season, especially obviously through Abigail and Petra. And sort of the season we saw go from demands of tradition to sort of this great acceptance of Abigail's drive and her want to kind of carve her own destiny with Adil as her partner. And I wanted to ask, what kind of then overall, not necessarily just Adil and Abigail, of course, but like what was the most rewarding aspect to you then in terms of the Bellwether family and this great growth that we got to see over the season, this beautiful growth within their family and the mother-daughter bonds that we see built?
I love that we got some insight into Petra, both through seeing her reflected through her husband's eyes in terms of, you know, their dynamics with Abigail. I also like to see that we got to meet Minerva. It was such a treat to work with Lisa, who plays Minerva, a longtime friend of mine. And so it was just great to get to explore that dynamic together. And I think the Minerva Petra dynamic gives so much insight and context into where her parenting style comes from, Petra's, and the pressures on her to deliver and why she would want to honor her mother by having her daughter follow in that. I also think an interesting insight into that family dynamic as well was introduced by the Imperatrix. And I think Marcy T. House, who played the Imperatrix, also brought that external pressure on the family in terms of what their line and role as leaders and need to keep the community safe through strategic alliances, all of that pressure on both Petra and Abigail. So I think that the family from within, as well as the external pressures on the family, were really interesting to explore in season 2.
Yes, it's interesting to see, like you talked about with Minerva, this great stoicism, but extreme wisdom, of course, as well, and that comes with years of service, but years of being, of history of going through circumstances and her own pressures and things like that. So yeah, it was really wonderful to get to watch what makes Petra tick, why, and see her dynamic through Minerva, see that how that kind of matriculated down through Abigail, and the fact that it's okay to be an individual. Like you don't have to always have a path carved out for yourself either, too. But it was really wonderful to watch this great this great family and their dynamics evolve and everyone understand one another and find a different perspective and a respectful perspective.
Well, I think it's also interesting how truly it echoes what happens in real life, in that, parents are always hardest on their children, but grandparents always want their grandchildren to have that extra freedom that was never afforded their children. So it's interesting how that sort of skips a generation in terms of that encouragement to carve one's own path. And so I think that was a really interesting dynamic when Petra is trying to figure out who this woman is who is talking to her daughter that was not talking to her that way when she was that age. So
absolutely. And speaking of that family dynamic, obviously it really manifested severely in the delusion that we got from Abigail and when she's trapped in Nicta's work. And obviously we've got to see this really hellish, horrific landscape that devastates the entire Bellwether family. Like it literally devastates them by killing them all in her delusion. And I wanted to talk a little bit about filming that and getting this death, destruction, and the emotional toll that it took on Abigail, but specifically more about the scenery and the cinematography of aspect of you all filming together this landscape that we get to watch in the delusion.
It was a long, cold night. It was a beautiful property that we were on. It was beautiful watching the way Ashley, Taylor, and Jessica are so consistently there for each other behind the scenes in the work. Because is the night we shot, it was the bellwether portion, and Taylor was there to support Abigail through that very emotional scene. And so I think that's been one of the gifts of this filming process, is to see how supportive all the women on the show are of each other and of the work that we're all doing together. So separate and apart from just the logistics of that night, that added bonus of being able to sort of sit back and watch these two young women support each other through the scene, which was just really lovely. Yeah, it was beautiful because it was so cold and crisp that the lights just twinkled in the trees, and I don't even know, it was almost quite magical, really, like for using the M word when we don't usually use that on this show. But yeah, I don't know if I'm answering the question in the way you envisioned it, but I'm sort of transported to that evening because it was so. We filmed so much on studio, and so just being out in the world and not at the base, and just having this really beautiful scenery to work with was really lovely. Yeah.
And you talk about this great support system that the girls have. I mean, it's just beautiful to watch that as much as we see it on screen, and how it matriculates and bleeds off screen as well, that they're all just they are the bellwether unit in a sense as well, because they take care of each other. And
they really do. That's been one of the true gifts of this show, because so often you see or hear the perpetuated stories about women in competition with each other. And I think one of the true gifts of this experience for me has been the multi-generational inclusion of women being seen and heard from, as well as just the open heart and support that all the women who've been assembled on the show have had for each other, be they regular cast or guest cast. Everyone has been welcomed and supported and appreciated for their contribution to telling the stories of this world. And I, for one, believe this Motherland world is so allegorical and needed for our time. And I think that Elliot has crafted a really wonderful guidance about the times we're living in by using these stories and echoes of our present day situation, which, when you think about when it would have been written versus what happened, and how, like, he's almost ahead of what's happening in real life, it's really quite remarkable. And I feel just so privileged to be a part of it, because I think it helps to, without hitting people over the head, reflect on the culture, what we need to learn to move us all forward in these challenging times. And I think I've seen in some of your other interviews the discussion about, the plague being like COVID and this and that. And I think, that it's amazing how there's nothing new under the sun, and how everything sort of echoes challenges we've come before. And yet we choose or not to evolve and meet those challenges better or worse than those who did before. And I think Motherland helps us to aspire to meeting the challenges from a better place.
Absolutely, 100%, very well, perfectly said. It echoes a lot of what we do see right now, and the significance and importance of us to keep moving forward, keep the markers moving forward in a positive path, and not fall back into bad and negative traits. And history is being made every single day, and so we need to keep moving forward and not let ourselves settle.
Definitely.
Well, I know we talked about the girls, of course, and the wonderful relationship that we get to see through the bellwether unit, but I love the relationship, like we've talked a lot about, of course, through Abigail and Petra. And there's this great nurturingness, but there's also this great strength that they each share in each other and kind of push for each other. And I wanted to also talk about sort of how that relationship is for you and Ashley, of course, because you obviously play mother and daughter together so well and so beautifully, and you feel like notes of each other. when we watch you on screen. So I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of how you two have really cultivated this great energy and beautiful relationship together that we see, of course, on screen, but as working actresses together as well in the mother-daughter sense that we see.
Well, I still remember the first moment I met Ashley. I was in the production office there to have a fitting and to get some scripts. And I was walking through this big room where we would do our read-throughs, and she was sitting at a table doing something, and she looked up and she went, "You must be playing my mom," and just was just this bundle of enthusiasm and energy and welcome. And I was just like, I would be happy for her to be my kid. So I was very impressed when I met her. I love watching her and Jessica and Taylor and Amalia work together. I love the fact that our scenes aren't static. So often when you see familial relationships, they all adopt a role and are very, very locked into that dynamic. And one of the gifts of the writing has been that Petra and Abigail are constantly changing and reacting to the new information and the new situation and the new context for wherever they are having that conversation. And so it doesn't feel like we just fall into sort of a dynamic, but we meet each other where we are. And I love that we've been able to do that, and that Petra has evolved when she receives new information, and that while she has a very clear code that she operates from, she is wise enough to be curious and to adapt with new information and to evolve her positions to the new realities she faces. And I think that's what makes her a good soldier and a good leader and a better mom all the time. I think she's grown as a mother, because I think she's met her match in Abigail. And so I think that that she's had to use the wisdom she would use in other contexts in her parenting. And I think that it's been really wonderful that they have been written in that way. And I think it keeps it really fun and exciting to work with Ashley, because we're never having the same scene over and over again. Like you see sometimes it's the same argument or the same place that they're still in, that they fall into as a dynamic. And we're always in a new place, having a new conversation. So it's been really fun for me, at least. I hope for her as well.
Well, speaking of mother figures, Petra has also sort of felt, in a sense, at times like a sort of secondary mother figure to Rael, being all the times that she's talked about, of course, the moments that she got to be with Willa and in the past, and was great, of course, powerful fixer, and what an amazing soldier, and things that Willa was for her mother. And then, of course, we learned that Willa was, like, in season 1 finale, we learned Willa was still alive. But we obviously don't know anyone else's reactions to Willa being alive, because the only people who we know on screen, at least, is, of course, Rael and Scylla know about this. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, because I talked to Diana, who plays Willa. But what do you think about Petra's reaction to Willa being alive? Because Diana and I are just absolutely interested in having, like, history, like Elliot or whomever, to make books about, like, the history, the prehistory of everything, and between Petra and Willa, and of course Quinn, who knew Willa in the session and stuff, like that, and Edwin before that. So we're like, we're proponents for books, like we want prehistory books between, like, Petra and Willa from the younger years.
It's interesting, because I think in season 1 that the homage to Willa that Petra pays when she speaks to Rael, I think, is legitimate. I think that was a deep respect and appreciation for her skills as a fixer and for her courage as a soldier. I'm not really clear what the discovery of Willa being alive has meant to Petra, especially since she had been a leader in the conflict that she assumed had ended Willa. I'm confident she would know about Willa's having survived that, because she would have had reports from Anacostia in the intelligence sphere, because she had sent her on a mission, and so I think she would have also had that report of Willa's sacrifice to the witch plague as well. So I think she's aware of it, but I'm I'm not sure she's really had time to process it, because events have unfolded so quickly since that, and that I think she was still trying to suss out the Nicta situation as a unique thing, only to have it expand into this surge into the Camarilla. So I don't know that Petra in general gives much time to reflection on her emotional state, much less one of that kind of intricacy where she would have had all sorts of conflicted feelings. What did her leadership cause Willa to defect? Like I think there'd be a lot of open questions in that whole dynamic for Petra, and I don't know. I'm curious to see if we explore that in season 3, but I don't know that Petra would have had a whole lot of time to process it.
Well, there certainly are many fan theories about the dynamic of Petra and Willa, whether Petra was like possibly spree, or she knew about, like, in a sense that she helped Willa escape in a way. There's a lot of amazing fan theories out there that involve Petra, and
I honestly don't know. I don't know. I'm curious, and it's funny because that's one of my favorite things to do after the show would air. Twitter conversations of theories that people had based on what new nuggets of information would have been released in the episode. So and the creativity of the switches is off the hook. Like some of the theories and the intricacies and the geopolitical machinations that people are seeing and constructing or piecing together, like, just so creative and so detail oriented and fascinating. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I definitely would not be surprised if any one of those theories was correct.
I'm gonna keep campaigning for the books.
Me too.
The prehistory books, and put it in Elliot's or somebody's ears that we want, like, the prequel. And then we would love to see you in the prequel. You and Diana, everybody in the prequel.
That would be great.
Well, we get this big scene, of course, between lots of big scenes of between Petra and Alder this season, but we get an important one that where Petra reminds Alder and says, like, don't forget that you're human, and that's something that sort of sends a shockwave, not just for Alder, but for a lot of people, in a sense as well, and in a multi-layered sense of it as well. But for Alder, she has been alive for so long. She's been fighting these wars and things for so long, and being a leader for so long, that the human aspect has needs to be dusted off. It's still there. It never went away, but it's sort of been hiding in the back corner of things. Time to dust it off and unshelve everything. But it's really sort of a reminder, like we said, that she hasn't had for like over 300 years. And I wanted to ask, sort of like, what does this moment really kind of signify to each, for both Alder and Petra, in this passing of the professional torch, in a sense? And how does, I know obviously Alder has the Biddy connections, but sort of how does this also sort of become a key to Petra too?
Well, I think right off, right at the point of transition, it's status quo in the army. I think insight into Petra is that she is, supporting the retirement of the Biddy program. So it's not that she wants to be Alder. She wants to do it her way with her vision, I think. So otherwise she would have sought the trappings of her perception of the Alder reign for herself. And I think she had challenges with that approach, and thinks it should be maybe more of a meritocracy where people rise to the office and do their time and keep it moving and evolving. So I think there's definitely an indication that Petra was going to take the army in a different direction. That said, again, events have unfolded. So I think at the point of her transition, she thought she had these great assets in the spree tamed, Alder there still as a support, and the bellwether unit as leading the next wave of forward-thinking soldiers to help her reshape things. all of that gets upended. So the army Petra had a vision for is not the army she has received. And I think that becomes a great jumping off point for us to see what happens next, because everything she would have aspired to invoke may or may not be relevant any longer, may or may not be doable any longer, may or may not have any purpose, especially with the existential threat of the Camarilla.
Well, I'm also looking forward to the evolving dynamics between Petra and President Wade, because there was a little bit of bad blood or bad taste left at the end between the two of them. And of course, we know about VP Silver being in bed with the Camarilla. So I'm going to, again, we don't know what happens, but I'm going to assume that the president may have a phone call or two, or a few passing moments that she may need Petra's assistance for, that may hopefully change her mind about the way that she also views witches and her perspective.
Yeah, that next meeting is going to be a little salty, a little spicy, I anticipate. I do not think there will be hugs at the door, but it'll be interesting to see, because now we're in a triangulation, right? Like, we've had that conflict between Petra and the president, but now are they on side against Silver? Is she on side with Silver? Like, where it's so unclear whose alliances and allegiances are with whom on that side. So it will be interesting to see. And especially since it's been set up that Alder's management of the president was not the way Petra would have done it. It will be interesting to see how that evolves, if she sticks to her righteousness on that, or if she believes the president needs to be managed because of the vice president's access to her. It'll be really, I'm so curious. It's
I love watching you work with Cheryl Lee Ralph, because Cheryl just has this incredible presence to her and this cadence in her voice, and she really takes on this important persona as the president, and she can be biting, but she can also be, venomous, and she can be strong, and we say suffer no fools too.
mm-hmm.
So I'm looking forward and hoping just that will be more scenes between Petra and President Wade, because I just love to watch Cheryl Lee Ralph work. I just love to watch her work.
We all do. It's so great when she's on set. She just is such a queen.
Well, we talked about how we leave Petra and Anacostia going back to Fort Salem, but at the end, in the finale, before they leave, they drop in from this helicopter, and at least I have called them Fort Salem's Angels, like Charlie's Angels, because that's exactly dropping down in these all black outfits look like to me in that moment, that you two are Fort Salem's Angels and you're going to come save the day. But I wanted to ask you about you and Demetria. Did you ever come up with a nickname or a fun way to refer to this new duo that we're going to get to see?
Oh, well, it's funny because we didn't have a ton of scenes together this season, but what we did have the opportunity to do was to do physical training together, because they arranged for us all to get sort of fight training and conditioning during the course of the season. So I would see her there, and she's such a powerhouse. And so she took to calling me Big Sis, so I call her Lil Sis. So sometimes in our social media, we tag each other that way. And she truly has become a dear friend, and I do consider her a little sis. So I think that dynamic, I'm hopeful that dynamic starts to spill over into our duo-ness for season 3. But I definitely think she's going to be a pillar of who Petra has to lean on. I think, especially with the Bellwether unit not available to her on the regular, that it is going to it's going to be interesting to see who Petra and Anacostia think they can trust. because I think that is going to be the most severe loss of an asset that they will face, is that they don't know who they can trust when they go back.
That's right. There's a lot of clues in the sense of like who signed in these extra newscast people, and who, besides obviously the vice president, might be a double agent or somebody who has been playing for, the army in Fort Salem. And everybody also has been saying like maybe we'll also get to see if there's like a navy or like other armed forces of witchdom in the Motherland world. So maybe there'll be an expansion of that.
It is all possible. But I think that not just the signing into the newscast, but Fort Salem was breached a few times, right? Because that's how they got to Alder a couple of times,
right? With
the biddies and stuff. So I think that has to be weighing heavily on Petra and Anacostia to figure out who's legit and who do we have to find.
And of course, there was obviously Scylla from season 1, who was the spree agent and inside as well. It would be interesting if she knew like the biddy that was double crossing Alder.
Yeah. And how do we hold, like how far back do we go? Because Scylla started off not very great. She's changed, she's evolved. So how far back do we go into her alliances and allegiances and conduct, or do we have a fresh start with her and Nicta on the bus? So it'll be interesting to see.
Well, I was going to say, filming, I think starts sort of in a couple months here in November. And I wanted to ask a little bit about, obviously we talk about the show being renewed for a third and final season. What you kind of are looking forward to go back to filming, and what might be, I guess, your lingering feelings as we head into a final season. So as I know there's obviously the switches are fighting and sharing on social media, so I'm not going to comment in that regard. But what are your lingering, I guess, feelings and what you're kind of looking forward to when you return?
Well, what I'm looking forward to most, to be honest, is seeing everybody, because COVID really robbed us of that when we were filming season 2. We didn't, we all were really dedicated to keeping cast and crew safe. And so we were not socializing, we were not out in the world. And so hopefully things have progressed to a point where we will be able to safely manage to be around each other more. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to seeing where these stories go. Like I know that there is a rich and full world that Elliot's created. So it'll be interesting which elements of that for a third and final season get distilled and brought forward, and how will they get presented open-ended so that we can revisit it in the future, or tying it all up so that it's a really satisfying conclusion. And I don't know which way it's going to go. And so that for me is what I'm really curious about, because I know either way it's going to be a compelling ride. I have described season 1 as a great roller coaster, and season 2 is like being shot out of a cannon. So I can only imagine what season 3 has in store for us. And being a fan of the show as much as a worker on it, I am really excited to see what wisdom comes through the Motherland lens for us all.
Well, you've certainly been keeping busy also in the off season of Motherland, and I want to just ask a little bit about what's been occupying your time then, and what we also can look forward to outside of the Motherland lens.
I have been a part of a show called Another Life, which is on Netflix, and season 2 of that with Katie Sackhoff is about to drop, and that was a great ride for me. I did a number of episodes of that, so I'm really excited to see that world shared with audiences. I've got a Christmas movie I just finished working on, which was really fun, and I did a thriller in the summer called Crawl Space with Jennifer Robertson from Schitt's Creek. And so that was a treat. She was lovely to work with. And so that was really, really fun. Most of my scenes with her are with her, but the star of that is Henry Thomas, who I remember seeing in ET as a child, so it was great to get to work with him too. So there's been some great stories I've been able to be a part of this year, and I've been really, really fortunate. Chesapeake Shores, I had a lovely run on that this spring too, which was really, really fun to be a part of their world. So I just appreciate the talented people who are keeping people entertained during these indoor times, and I'm really grateful to have been able to go play on a few different sets this year.
Well, for me personally, again, as being a fan of watching Motherland, I just wanted to say thank you so much for telling these important stories and being a part of this incredible empowerment that we get to watch every week. And these women who are so beautifully portrayed in all of their complexity. And I want to say thank you, like I said, to you for just being a very important catalyst as well. For the people that we get to watch, and why it's so important that we see these types of female empowering figures on screen.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And we really appreciate and are grateful for your support of the show and you taking the time to hear our stories, both really in relation to Motherland and in relation to ourselves. So thank you very much for having this platform for us to speak with you.
It's my pleasure.